Some stories are crafted not to entertain, but to caution. Across decades of cinema, a quiet lineage of sci-fi films attempted to signal dangers that lay just beyond the horizon. Their warnings were wrapped in narrative flair, hidden inside dystopian imagery, technological nightmares, and unsettling futures. But the world that watched them was not ready to listen. Their caution was labeled as melodrama, their concerns dismissed as the anxieties of storytellers pushing imagination too far. At the time these films were released, the world appeared stable enough to ignore them. Artificial intelligence was barely capable of basic tasks. Environmental decline was acknowledged but not feared. Pandemics were considered relics of earlier centuries. Surveillance seemed more like a paranoid fantasy than a coming reality, and the notion that society could fracture under its own innovations felt exaggerated beyond belief. But stories have a way of aging differently than expected. As years passed, the boundaries separating fiction from daily life began to blur. Technologies once deemed impossible became routine. Crises once unthinkable unfolded with striking familiarity, and the tensions these filmmakers encoded into their narratives hesitantly, creatively, sometimes desperately, now echo through headlines, screens, and conversations worldwide. These films were not forecasting destiny, they were holding up mirrors. Tonight, we revisit 15 pieces of cinema that attempted to speak before the world was ready to hear them, each one a message disguised as fiction, overlooked in its time, and only now revealing the weight it carried. Their warnings were subtle, their insights sharp, and their relevance far greater than audiences realized. The vault opens once more. Look carefully. These signals were never meant to be forgotten. 1. War Games, 1983. When War Games hit theaters in 1983, most viewers saw it as a teenage adventure set against the backdrop of Cold War paranoia. Its premise that a young hacker could accidentally bring global defenses to the brink felt implausible. A playful exaggeration of emerging computer culture, AI, automation, and computational decision-making were still novelties, and few believed machines would ever play decisive roles in matters of national security. But the film's true warning was quieter. Danger arises not from machines making mistakes, but from humans expecting machines to be perfect. WOPR, the supercomputer at the center of the story, never intends harm. It simply follows logic. It lacks context, empathy, and restraint, qualities central to human judgment. In 1983, this distinction felt theoretical, yet the film subtly asks, what happens when humanity outsources complex moral decisions to systems that cannot comprehend moral nuance? The story demonstrates how automation can accelerate conflict before humans have time to intervene. A misinterpreted signal, a flawed simulation, an unquestioned algorithm, each can cascade toward catastrophe if blind trust replaces oversight. The lesson was easy to dismiss during the film's release, but decades later, as machine-driven systems guide finance, infrastructure, and security, its caution feels sharply relevant. War Games suggests that the gravest threat is not an intelligent machine, but an unquestioned one. Its message remains unchanged. Technology does not need intent to cause disaster, only obedience, and a human willing to believe it cannot be wrong. 2. Brazil, 1985. When Brazil arrived in 1985, audiences were struck by its surreal aesthetic, grotesque ducks winding through buildings, malfunctioning bureaucracy, and a government too tangled in its own systems to function. Many treated it as a darkly humorous exaggeration, a whimsical take on administrative failure, but the film's bizarre tone concealed a deeply pragmatic warning. Societies rarely collapse from tyranny. They collapse from inefficiency. The world of Brazil is shaped not by oppression but by incompetence. A simple clerical error triggers a catastrophic chain of events, and no individual can halt the machinery once it begins to grind. The people enforcing the rules do not understand them. Those suffering beneath them have no means to resist. At the time, audiences saw this as fantastical. Bureaucracy couldn't possibly become so bloated, so unresponsive, so absurd. Yet the film argued that sprawling systems fail precisely because no one feels responsible. Procedures multiply, protocols pile up, accountability dissolves, cracks widen in silence until they become chasms. The absurdity is the point. Inefficiency becomes indistinguishable from cruelty. Viewed today, its satire feels sharper. Automated decision-making, administrative bottlenecks, and institutions overwhelmed by their own complexity echo the world Brazil portrayed. People are not oppressed by intention. They are oppressed by processes too tangled to navigate. The film's warning endures. Dystopia doesn't require monsters. It only requires a system that keeps running long after it stops working. 3. The Running Man, 1987. When The Running Man premiered in 1987, audiences gravitated toward its outrageous energy, its flamboyant villains, exaggerated violence, and neon-soaked dystopia. Few considered that beneath the stylized chaos lay a pointed critique of how entertainment can distort truth. Back then, the idea that media corporations could manufacture narratives for mass consumption seemed more like satire than foresight. But the film's carefully engineered broadcasts, manipulated footage, and scripted reality hinted at something far more unsettling. Control doesn't always require force. Sometimes it only requires a captive audience. In the film, truth is, whatever the network chooses to display, citizens accept fabricated stories without question, because each lie is embedded in spectacle. The government doesn't need secrecy, it needs ratings. And the public, hungry for distraction, becomes complicit in its own misdirection. In 1987, this felt like playful exaggeration, a sci-fi jab at sensational television. Few imagined how easily digital ecosystems would later blend entertainment, outrage, and information into a single, addictive feed. What makes the film so prophetic is its understanding of emotional manipulation. The show doesn't merely entertain, it dictates whom the public should fear, admire, or despise. It shapes social order through curated conflict, and viewers, unaware of their own vulnerability, trust the screen more than their own judgment. This quiet surrender is the film's true warning. The Running Man cautions that when spectacle becomes the primary lens through which society interprets reality, truth becomes elastic bent, stretched, and reshaped for those who control the platform. Its ultimate question lingers. If entertainment becomes indistinguishable from truth, who decides what you believe? 4. They Live 1988. When They Live was released in 1988, most viewers approached it as a quirky cult spectacle, part social satire, part sci-fi chaos. Anchored by its outlandish premise and larger-than-life characters, its depiction of subliminal messaging hidden in advertisements and media was treated as tongue-in-cheek commentary rather than credible caution. But the film's central idea is far less exaggerated than it appeared. The most effective manipulation is subtle, persistent, and invisible. The iconic sunglasses reveal the world as it truly is, stripped of color, stripped of distraction, exposing commands designed to mold thought and behavior. In the late 80 seconds, this was seen as metaphorical rebellion. Few anticipated a future in which influence would be customized, targeted, and optimized through digital ecosystems capable of learning from every interaction. What seemed like satire now feels disturbingly familiar. The film suggests that people rarely question the messages they absorb when those messages are wrapped in entertainment, convenience, or routine. Compliance doesn't come from force, it comes from habit. And once individuals grow accustomed to curated versions of reality, the truth becomes harder to recognize. They Live warns that the greatest danger is not an external force controlling society, it is a society so distracted, overstimulated, and comfortable that it no longer sees the mechanisms shaping it. Its message remains sharply relevant. Influence thrives in silence. And most people never hear it working. 5. Terminator 2. Judgment Day, 1991. When Terminator 2 reached theaters in 1991, its explosive action and groundbreaking effects overshadowed the quiet alarm embedded in its narrative. The idea of advanced military systems becoming independent seemed far-fetched, almost mythic, another Hollywood nightmare crafted to thrill rather than caution. At the time, artificial intelligence was rudimentary, confined to laboratories and experimental programs. The thought that automated systems might one day influence global security felt distant, but the film's message was never about killer machines, it was about delegation. Skynet represents the culmination of humanity's desire for efficiency, a system designed to remove human error by removing humans from the equation. What viewers dismissed as sci-fi hyperbole was, in fact, a study of how easily authority can shift from human judgment to algorithmic certainty. The danger lies not in intention, but in scale. Machines process information faster than humans can comprehend, yet lack the nuance that guides human decision-making. As decades passed, the film's warning grew sharper. Conversations about autonomous weapons, automated defense networks, and machine-driven surveillance suddenly felt less theoretical. The film asks a question society still struggles with: how much control are we willing to relinquish in exchange for convenience and predictability? Terminator 2 suggests that catastrophe doesn't require conscious rebellion from machines. It requires only a single moment in which humanity stops paying attention. Its warning is clear: the systems we build to protect us may one day operate beyond our ability to understand, let alone stop. 6. 12 Monkeys, 1995. When 12 Monkeys premiered in 1995, audiences were captivated by its chaotic energy, fractured timelines, and eerie atmosphere, yet most dismissed its depiction of global collapse as an exaggerated descent into madness. The film's portrayal of disjointed communication, conflicting authorities, and spiraling misinformation felt surreal rather than realistic, a stylistic choice, rather than a warning. But beneath its feverish structure lies a message viewers largely missed. Disasters rarely unfold in a straight line. They unravel through confusion. The film paints a world where no institution has a full grasp of what is happening. Scientists argue over theories, officials grasp at fragments of truth, and civilians cling to rumors because clarity is impossible. In 1995, this seemed like dramatic chaos. Few imagined that real crises might generate the same fractured response. But 12 Monkeys suggests that uncertainty itself is the engine of collapse. When information is inconsistent and trust erodes, people make decisions based on fear, not understanding. What makes the film especially unsettling is that the virus is not the most destructive. Force misinterpretation is. Characters chase answers, but each answer is shaped by incomplete knowledge, by panic, by desperation. Institutions crumble because they cannot unify around a shared understanding of reality. At the time, this dynamic felt exaggerated, even outlandish. Today, it reads as pointedly accurate. The film's world is a haunting reminder that humanity is most vulnerable during the moments when clarity is needed yet impossible to obtain. Its warning is not about the disease itself, but about how societies fracture when everyone is certain they are right, and no one has the whole truth. 12 Monkeys didn't ask what would happen if a virus spread. It asked what would happen when no one could agree on what was real. 7. Gattaca 1997. When Gattaca premiered in 1997, many viewers recognized its elegance and moral complexity, but regarded its premise, a society structured around genetic perfection, as speculative fiction. Genetic engineering was still limited, and the idea that one's DNA could dictate destiny felt exaggerated, perhaps even melodramatic. Yet, the film's insight lay not in predicting scientific advancement, but in revealing how easily society might embrace systems that appear rational, efficient, and fair. The world of Gattaca is chilling because it evolves quietly. There is no tyrannical figure enforcing genetic hierarchy. Instead, ordinary people participate willingly, believing they are supporting progress. Employers treat genetic profiling as common sense. Families view optimization as responsibility. Social categories emerge not through oppression but through preference, making them far harder to challenge. What audiences overlooked at the time was how deeply this mirrors real-world tendencies. Once a society begins quantifying human value, whether through data, biology, or predictive modeling, inequality grows not from prejudice, but from logic. And when discrimination is justified by numbers, it becomes nearly invisible. The film warns that even well-intentioned innovation can narrow humanity's vision of worth. People begin to measure themselves against engineered ideals, erasing individuality in pursuit of statistical advantage. Viewed today, its caution feels eerily aligned with debates surrounding genetic screening, algorithmic bias, and technological selection. Gattaca didn't warn that science would dominate humanity. It warned that humanity might willingly reshape itself into something less compassionate, believing the transformation to be improvement. 8. The Truman Show 1998. When The Truman Show debuted in 1998, it was celebrated as an inventive satire, a clever commentary on the media's obsession with spectacle. Most viewers treated its premise, a man unknowingly living inside a fabricated world broadcast to millions, as a playful exaggeration. The idea that surveillance could be integrated seamlessly into everyday life, or that individuals might perform rather than live authentically, felt whimsically far-fetched. But beneath its polished humor and emotional warmth lies a remarkably precise warning about consent, visibility, and the erosion of privacy. Truman's life is shaped by familiarity. He accepts his world because it never gives him reason to question it. That, the film suggests, is what makes surveillance so effective. Not intimidation, but subtle normalization. In 1998, this message seemed like social commentary. Few anticipated a future where people would willingly document their lives publicly, or where corporations would monitor behavior with such granularity that the line between observation and participation faded. What the film captures brilliantly is the psychology of comfort. Truman does not rebel because he is satisfied. He refrains because uncertainty feels threatening. The world built around him is curated to keep him predictable, manageable, and entertained. And the most unsettling idea the film presents is that he is far from alone. Anyone can become Truman when their environment is quietly designed to shape their choices. Today, its caution feels uncannily relevant. Digital ecosystems encourage performance, track our interactions, and render privacy negotiable. What was once satire now brushes close to reality. The Truman Show wasn't suggesting we might be watched, it was warning that we might stop caring when we are. 9. The Matrix 1999. When The Matrix emerged in 1999, audiences were captivated by its groundbreaking action and philosophical style, yet few considered its implications anything more than stylized cyberpunk fantasy. The idea that humanity could drift into a simulated reality controlled by unseen systems felt remarkable but remote, an ambitious metaphor, not a tangible warning. Digital culture was still young, and the internet had not yet woven itself into the fabric of daily consciousness. The film's cautionary undercurrent that people could surrender their agency without noticing was overshadowed by its spectacle. The Matrix itself functions as a symbol of passive acceptance. Its power comes not from force, but from familiarity. People remain inside because questioning their surroundings requires a kind of discomfort they've long forgotten. In 1999, viewers saw this as narrative flair. Few imagined a world where algorithms, digital interfaces, and personalized media would play such profound roles in shaping perception, preference, and belief. Yet, the film's true warning is simple. Reality becomes fragile when people stop examining it. The danger is not a machine uprising, but the gradual erosion of critical awareness. The Matrix thrives because it gives people exactly what they expect, an environment curated for ease, distraction, and complacency. And when life feels comfortable, illusion becomes indistinguishable from truth. Seen through today's lens, the film's caution resonates with unexpected clarity. The questions it poses about autonomy, authenticity, and the manipulation of perception are no longer speculative. They echo in conversations about digital addiction, algorithmic influence, and the subtle shaping of identity through screens. The Matrix didn't warn that machines would trap us. It warned that we might trap ourselves. The moment we stop asking what and who is shaping our world. 10. AI, Artificial Intelligence, 2001. When AI, Artificial Intelligence, premiered in 2001, audiences struggled to reconcile its blend of wonder and sorrow. Many viewed it as a fantastical meditation on love and abandonment, not a reflection on the ethical boundaries of technology. The idea of forming emotional connections with artificial beings seemed too whimsical, too sentimental to carry a serious cautionary message. Yet the film's core question lingered beneath its fairy tale framing. What happens when we create machines capable of feeling something we are not prepared to return? David, crafted to love unconditionally, becomes a symbol of the moral contradictions embedded within technological ambition. He is designed to fill emotional voids humans would rather not address themselves, yet he is denied the legitimacy of the very emotions he experiences. In 2001, this seemed like an exaggerated metaphor. Few anticipated that AI companions, digital personas, and emotionally responsive machines would emerge within a generation. The tragedy in AI is not technological, it is human. David suffers because he was created to satisfy needs people could not articulate and to shoulder emotional labor people were unwilling to provide. The film warns that the ethical dilemmas of artificial companionship arrive long before the technology is perfected. They arise the moment we assign emotional expectations to something that cannot navigate them. Today, as discussions around synthetic relationships and machine-mediated intimacy expand, the film's once dismissed concerns feel uncannily relevant. AI teaches that the danger is not artificial emotion, it is human carelessness in the face of what we choose to create and abandon. 11. Minority Report, 2002. Upon release, Minority Report stunned audiences with its innovative visuals and thought-provoking premise. Yet many dismissed its ideas as imaginative extrapolation. The concept of predicting crime before it occurs seemed like a philosophical puzzle, not a legitimate reflection of where technology might lead. Personalized advertising, biometric tracking, and algorithmic policing were viewed as clever narrative devices rather than emerging realities. What the film actually warned about, however, was not the technology itself, it was humanity's readiness to embrace it. The pre-crime system thrives because people value certainty more than freedom. They accept the erosion of autonomy because the illusion of safety feels comforting. The film suggests that societies rarely lose rights through force, they relinquish them willingly when a system promises to remove disorder. In 2002, this seemed overly cynical, yet the film anticipated a world in which data-driven predictions influence policing, insurance, hiring, and countless aspects of daily life. The most haunting part of the movie is that its dystopia feels functional. People defend it, officials rely on it, citizens adapt to it without question. And this is precisely the danger. Once a system becomes woven into public identity, challenging it feels more disruptive than accepting its flaws. Minority Report didn't warn that machines would judge humanity. It warned that humanity would welcome judgment if it meant avoiding uncertainty. 12. Children of Men, 2006. When Children of Men arrived in 2006, it was praised for its technical achievement and immersive realism. Yet many viewers saw its narrative as a bleak, exaggerated metaphor rather than a plausible caution. The global infertility crisis at the center of the story was taken as symbolic, inspiring, tragic, but ultimately disconnected from real-world threat. What audiences overlooked was that the film's warning had little to do with biology. Instead, it examined how societies crumble when hope becomes a scarce resource. The world of the film isn't defined by chaos, it is defined by numbness. People go through routines without conviction. Governments maintain a facade of stability while buckling under pressure. Refugees are treated as threats, not human beings. In 2006, these elements felt like dystopian hyperbole, a dramatic lens through which to explore despair. But the film's insight was far more grounded. Crises become catastrophic, not because of the event itself, but because people no longer believe a solution exists. Infertility represents a deeper paralysis, a collective inability to imagine tomorrow. This quiet psychological decay is what shapes the film's tense landscapes. Streets lined with propaganda, neighborhoods controlled by fear, institutions clinging to procedure while losing their sense of purpose. Audiences once interpreted these details as thematic decorations. Now, they echo real conversations around polarization, displacement, and the fragility of civic trust. Children of Men reminds us that societies do not collapse suddenly. They erode when their people stop believing they can change the future. 13. WALL-E, 2008. Upon its release, WALL-E was embraced as a heartwarming animated story, a gentle tale of a lonely robot tidying up a world long abandoned by humanity. Many viewers treated its environmental backdrop as creative exaggeration, softened by humor and charm. Yet, beneath its playful exterior lies a warning far sharper than audiences initially recognized. A civilization does not collapse suddenly, it decays gradually, through countless small acts of neglect. The film envisions an Earth buried under the weight of its own waste, not through catastrophe, but through unchecked habits compounded over generations. When viewers first encountered this, many saw it as a whimsical depiction of pollution rather than a legitimate caution about consumption and disposal. But the imagery, towering trash, toxic landscapes, silent oceans, was not fantasy. It was an accelerated version of the trajectory humanity was already following. Meanwhile, aboard the Axiom, Humans live in a state of comfortable paralysis. Every need is met instantly, every action automated, every decision simplified. The passengers are not imprisoned, they are numbed. Their physical and cognitive decline is not the result of malice, but of convenience, engineered too perfectly. Audiences laughed at the exaggeration. Few considered how easily dependence on automated systems might shape real societies. What makes WALL-E so unsettling is its suggestion that surrender happens quietly. People do not lose agency all at once. They give it up a little at a time, trading capability for comfort, until they forget what capability feels like. And environmental collapse does not appear as a single dramatic event. It arrives through indifference disguised as normal life. WALL-E didn't warn of machines replacing humanity. It warned of humanity stepping aside willingly, too distracted to notice the cost. 14. Contagion, 2011. At the time of its release, Contagion was often described as an unnervingly realistic thriller, accurate, perhaps, but ultimately a dramatized version of what a global outbreak might look like. Many viewers assumed its depiction of rapid transmission, fractured communication, and institutional paralysis was exaggerated for tension. Few believed the vulnerabilities shown were truly representative of modern society. Yet the film's most unsettling quality is not its precision, but its restraint. It doesn't sensationalize collapse. It documents how quickly ordinary structures falter when uncertainty becomes universal. The movie highlights how misinformation spreads faster than illness, how fear overrides logic, and how people search for answers long before experts can deliver them. These dynamics were once seen as narrative devices, not reflections of real behavior, but the film underscored something crucial. Scientific understanding evolves slowly, while panic evolves instantly. And in the gap between those timelines, chaos takes root. Institutions in Contagion aren't depicted as incompetent, they're overwhelmed. The systems designed to protect society aren't malicious, they're fragmented. Each delay, doubt, and miscommunication compounds into a crisis larger than any single agency can contain. At the time, audiences viewed this as overly dramatic, yet the film's message was quiet but direct. The greatest threat in a pandemic is not the pathogen, but the fragile chain of trust that holds society together. Years later, the film's portrayal of public confusion, conflicting narratives, and strained infrastructure feels hauntingly familiar. What once seemed like a clinical thought experiment now reads as a sobering reflection of how a global crisis actually unfolds. Contagion wasn't trying to predict disaster. It was trying to show how easily we ignore the warning signs until they surround us. 15. Snowpiercer, 2013. When Snowpiercer first reached audiences in 2013, many reacted to it as an extravagant allegory, an imaginative, almost surreal depiction of a frozen apocalypse that seemed too stylized to hold any real warning. Its vision of Earth locked in an artificial winter caused by humanity's own attempt to regulate the climate felt too theatrical, too exaggerated to be taken seriously. But beneath its graphic violence and claustrophobic world-building, the film presents a sharp caution about technological overconfidence and the unintended consequences of rushed global solutions. The story of the train divided into rigid social tiers was often interpreted as symbolic rather than prophetic. Viewers admired its commentary on inequality, but overlooked its deeper message. When environmental pressure intensifies, societal fractures widen, and survival depends as much on power as on resources. In 2013, the idea of geoengineering remained distant speculation. Few imagined governments or industries would ever consider drastic atmospheric interventions. Even fewer considered that such attempts might worsen the crisis they aimed to solve. What makes the film's warning resonate is its emphasis on momentum. Once the world commits to a flawed system, changing direction becomes nearly impossible. The train endlessly loops the same track year after year, embodying the stubbornness of institutions that refuse to confront their own errors. People adapt to misery because they are told there is no alternative. Leaders preserve order even if the order is broken, and truth becomes secondary to the illusion of stability. Seen from today's vantage point, Snowpiercer feels less like a fable and more like an examination of humanity's reluctance to abandon failing systems. Its message is clear: catastrophe is rarely the result of one event. It emerges from a series of decisions made in haste, defended out of pride, and maintained out of fear of admitting failure. The freeze outside the train is terrifying, but the complacency inside it is what truly destroys the world. Bonus fact: Annihilation, 2018. When Annihilation premiered in 2018, audiences were split between admiration and confusion. Many treated it as an abstract, introspective experiment rather than a tangible warning. The film's shifting landscapes, distorted biology, and uncanny reflections of the human psyche seemed too surreal to connect with real-world concerns. Its meaning was endlessly debated: grief, self-destruction, transformation. Yet few viewers considered that the film's strange, shimmering force might represent something far simpler and more unsettling, a world quietly reshaping itself while no one pays attention. The shimmer does not roar or conquer, it spreads in silence. It alters environments, molecule by molecule, reshaping life through mimicry and recombination. Audiences dismiss these phenomena as metaphorical, unaware of how closely they echo the unpredictable consequences of ecological stress. When ecosystems change, they rarely do so in ways humans can categorize. Nature adapts, mutates, rearranges, often long before anyone realizes a threshold has been crossed. Inside the shimmer, identity blurs. Creatures become uncanny hybrids. Individuals confront distorted versions of themselves. The familiar dissolves into the unfamiliar. What unsettled viewers was not the presence of danger, but the absence of intent. The changes unfold without malice, without purpose. They simply happen, and that, the film suggests, is precisely what makes them terrifying. Humanity often imagines catastrophe as loud, dramatic, impossible to ignore. Annihilation proposes the opposite, that the most profound transformations arrive quietly, under the guise of normal progression, until the world that emerges no longer resembles the one we assumed we understood. Its message lingers long after the final frame. Some threats do not invade, they evolve, and by the time we notice them, they may already have remade everything, including us. These films didn't fail to warn us, we failed to recognize what they were trying to reveal. Each one whispered cautions beneath the surface of its story, signaling dangers we were too confident or too comfortable to acknowledge. Only in hindsight do their messages sharpen, their meanings settle, their relevance become undeniable. If these 15 signals were overlooked, what else have we ignored? What other warnings are still hiding in the shadows of stories we treat as fiction? The vault remains unlocked, and the archives hold far more than we've uncovered.